Independence is, as it was said to me by somebody familiar with their thinking at this point, still the preference and the leader in the clubhouse. Now, the next sentence was, just got to see what other shoes are going to drop. So, I mean, this thing could still get destabilized to the point that they have to give up independence. If that happens, the Big Ten is the obvious choice.
Hi there, and welcome in. It might confuse you a little bit. It might feel like a Tuesday, but because Monday was the 4th of July, actually today is Wednesday, and for a lot of people that live for the weekends, that's all right. Welcome in to Michigan Today, Michigan football and baseball today, the Maize and Blue Review. I'm Dennis Fithian. We're live weekdays at 1 o'clock talking about the latest in Michigan sports, and we've got a good one for you here today. There are some things going on. I asked a question on our Maize and Blue Review board called The Den about Michigan football recruiting and where it ultimately ends up. I'll share a little bit of that with you. We do have a feeler out for the senior editor of Maize and Blue Review, Brandon Justice, to join us to talk a little Michigan baseball. He can add his 2 cents in on recruiting as well. If you're out there, plenty of ways to join us. You can use the feedback wherever you're at. I read the feedback, whether it's on Clubhouse, whether you're on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter. Are there any other places? Probably, but those are the main ones. You have a call-in number if you're watching this or listening to it live, 810-666-1574. That is going for you. Today, what are we talking about? Well, let's just put a little menu for those of you that are watching this show. We will talk about that Michigan baseball hire with Tracy Smith taking over for the Maize and Blue. We also have the recruiting rankings that I mentioned. I will predict where I think Michigan will end up all the way. February? What is it? 7 months? You start counting out. That's a long ways away. So when people say it's still early in recruiting, in some ways it is really early when you have 7 months. In other ways, when you're ranked where you are and you're Michigan, you're hoping that you're going to be in a little bit better standing right now. All of it's understandable. I think it reflects about where Michigan is at with the name, image, and likeness that we talk about all the time, and how you predict that's going to play out. Michigan is supposed to haul in a pretty big offensive lineman, a highly thought of local kid tomorrow. People are expecting that to happen. That's going to bump Michigan up a little bit, and so maybe we'll look back at July and say, all the name, image, and likeness, and Michigan acting like they're zagging while everybody else is zigging, and maybe it'll end up working. Now, I also talked about Regent Acker, who had something to say about name, image, and likeness that we talked about yesterday. I'm sure that a lot of other people have now. It happened just an hour or two before the show. I'm sure a lot of other people picked up on that, especially Michigan folks, and had their thoughts. So if you missed those, we'll be able to give those to you as well. So Michigan baseball recruiting ranking prediction and Regent Acker on name, image, and likeness. If you missed what Acker had to say, I put I thought was I don't know if it's the most interesting. I guess it is, because that's the one I picked. Hopefully it is. I didn't take the most interesting one. I just picked one. Now, Acker, who was on vacation, had a series of things to say about name, image, and likeness, but he made a prediction. And his prediction was using name, image, and likeness as a recruiting incentive will be nearly impossible for most schools to keep up. Why? Worst ROI of any NIL scheme by far. Now, I didn't agree with that yesterday. I still don't agree with that. It really comes down to what you think is nearly impossible for most schools. There's 300 schools. So yeah, the majority of schools, dumping money left and right into high school prospects that that's like the NFL draft. Well, we know that every first round pick's not going to, every second round, every third round pick. We know that is not going to happen. And so, that going in, there have been a lot of schools that have been dumping money into high school recruits for the longest of time, and it doesn't seem like that has stopped them. That would be my point to Jordan Acker, but maybe he ends up being right. We all read what and listen to what people are saying, and then we have our own opinions on it, and then we go from there. And what you hope is that Michigan's plan, if you're a Michigan fan, is going to work, even when there's a lot of people, like myself included, have looked at it and saying, you know what, I think that they're going to change their approach ultimately about staying away from the high school players and their stance, which has been a consistent stance of once the players get in and you know what you've got and they're there for a couple of years, you're going to end up taking care of them. I don't think it sounds good, but I don't think that strategy is ultimately going to work for them. We'll see. And, it was pointed out to me yesterday, what do I expect somebody that's as a regent to say? Hey, let's get down in the dirt. Even though it's a rule, nobody's paying attention to it. Let's get in there and break it. No, you wouldn't expect that. And that's what I was saying all along, when it came to Michigan. It's like, Harbaugh could say I didn't like when he broke out his transformational over transactional statement. I wish he would have added yeah, that's it, but we're ready to play with the big boys and we'll take care of anybody. Nobody's going to, the Michigan's in the mix, he could have said something like that. And then even if he didn't add something to the transactional part, people behind the scenes could have been operating a different way. It doesn't look like that right now. So that's just where we're sitting. One thing in sports that I don't know if it's a rule of mine, but it is something that I like mostly in sports when I see it. And that is when all teams are doing one thing, you've got another team that's doing something else. The zag to the zig or the zig to the zag, whether you're like in the NFL, the Ravens a couple of years ago, everybody's like, you got to throw the football all the time. It's throw the football. It's a passing league. And then Lamar Jackson comes in and everybody's zigging and the Ravens zag and they end up going 14-2 and there was just 16 games, Jackson's the MVP. And you're like, look at the Ravens, man. They have turned the NFL on its side. Now they didn't have the success in the NFL. It would have been something. It's like the Rams in the NFL for the last couple of years. Now they've got, their general manager, is it Les Snead, who started taking all of his first round picks in the NFL since they changed the rules the year after the Lions had the number one pick. It was like they were valuable. First round picks were worth their weight in gold. How many times have you heard it in the NFL? You get a quarterback on a rookie contract, then your salary cap and all of that. So, draft choices are what makes this was the standard approach. It's what makes the league. And the Rams has just traded away theirs left and right. Jalen Ramsey, hey, you want, you want this player, you want that player. They just traded them all. I don't think the Rams have had a first-round pick for the last couple of years. And I don't think they're going to have one for the next couple of years. People would say, that's crazy. Well, they won the Super Bowl. The point about all of that is they're zagging. Everybody else would look at them and say, that's stupid. We're doing this. And they did something different. And it looks like Michigan, where everybody else is like, hey, we're promising. We understand how this works with the NIL. The other teams that have done it all along, they had their approach and they've continued it. Then teams that were not willing to, cross the line of suitcases of cash and everything, they look at it now. They're like, we don't have to do that. This is very easy. And nobody is the NCAA. Nobody's enforcing any rules. So we're involved. And yet Michigan has been like, no, it's not us. Completely different. A complete zag. Like I said, I like that when I see it in sports. We'll see if it ends up working out for Michigan. Hopefully it does. You know what I'm saying? So let's continue on to the next screen. So Jordan Acker, the Michigan regent, he made his prediction. I'm ready to make my prediction on Michigan. Currently, they are ranked 50th. They dropped a couple slots since yesterday. This is the Rivals team rankings. Michigan currently ranked 50th in Rivals 23 football rankings. The first Wednesday in February is the signing day. There's, of course, an early signing day if you follow along and everything with that. But ultimately, I'm asking you, and I'm going to give you my prediction here, where Michigan will end up falling when it comes to, or I don't want to say where they will ultimately end up being ranked in Rivals 23 football rankings. Last year, they were number 8. And if you would have got to me after the Ohio State game, certainly if you would have got to me after the Big Ten championship game, or any part, even after the college football playoff, where Michigan got beat up pretty good by Georgia, 34-11, I'd have said, I still think Michigan, based on winning the Big Ten, look at, they had a number 8 class last year. Now they win the Big Ten. I think they got their eyes on moving up. There's great momentum now. I think that, you could, whether it be predict or hope, whatever it is, it didn't sound nuts to say that Michigan could be a top 5 team in terms of hauling in that kind of recruiting class. And yet name, image, and likeness looks like it has pushed them, way back. Now, look, tomorrow, as mentioned, Michigan is expected to get a 4-star lineman from right here in state. That's going to bump them up a little bit. And then, they're whatever else, they've got their barbecue. If somehow, this plays out with Dante Moore, the 5-star quarterback, it doesn't look like Michigan's going to get the quarterback services out of Detroit right now. But the longer it plays out, they're still in with a chance. I mean, he still is keeping an eye on Michigan and let this play out. And, crazier things have, I think you're in the category of crazier things that have happened in recruiting, but Michigan's supposed to launch some, new collective in the fall. Maybe Dante's just waiting on that. Also, Dante, if you think about the news of the Big Ten overall grabbing USC and UCLA, who knows where the now Pac-10 is going to end up. The latest looks like, the Washington and Oregon are just going to sit there, and they're going to have to play in a Pac-10 without USC and UCLA, which is, going to greatly diminish their profile. And then who really knows where they're going to end up? Maybe they end up merging with the Big 12. Maybe the Big 10 ultimately takes a couple of the schools from the Pac-10. I don't know. Your guess is almost as good as mine, but the part about this is that there's some uncertainty. If you're Dante Moore and you were thinking, I really like Oregon, they've offered me a tremendous package, whatever that is, the whole thing, he likes it. It's changed from wherever we were all sitting here. When was it? Thursday. So it's not even the news isn't even a week old. And with Oregon now sitting there losing 2 of their big members out of the Pac-12 and it now being the Pac-10. Maybe he'll still want to go there. Maybe that won't affect him at all, but maybe it will. The point is, so my prediction, I think that Michigan will end up finishing out of the top 25 at number 26. And I say this because I believe the majority of the 5 stars are going to go for the guaranteed money, and Michigan's going to be shut out when it comes to the 5 stars. I also think that when it comes to the cream of the crop of the 4 stars, that Michigan will ultimately be shut out when it comes down to the majority of the 4 stars. They'll pick up some players, they'll get 20 some odd recruits, and they're not going to end up at 50, and they're not going to be in the 40s. They're going to be in the 30s, but I think 26. Now, is 26 disappointing? It's disappointing when you were 8 last year, you win the Big Ten, and then you're sitting there at 26. That is momentum. But the name, image, and likeness, Michigan they're staying consistent to what they believe on it. Maybe in the fall, and maybe they'll be able to flip a bunch of players because they're going to have this gigantic NIL bag, come fall, and teams will see what Michigan's doing, and maybe it'll end up working out for them. They'll flip a bunch of people, and then maybe with the success that, I think that they're going to have in the fall, that's going to raise their profile, and that can help them. Of course, it's going to help them if you succeed and you're having a fantastic success on the field and your name's constantly on ESPN or anywhere else nationally, then, that's improves your cachet and all of that. So I found that when I put this question out to Michigan fans on the Den Maize and Blue Review, that they were all over the place. Some of them were very skeptical. Some of them are very positive. I have found myself actually toggling back and forth between optimism and pessimism when it comes down to Michigan and recruiting, and ultimately where they'll end up. But my best guess right now is at 26. What about you? What do you think? You want to put a number out there? You want to either call it in or add it on the feedback? Antoine, Oregon stuck in limbo. Dante might not go there. Yeah, Antoine, we are thinking the same way today. LTM saying hi to everyone. More from Antoine. He thinks the Big Ten will go after Stanford for the academic money. If Notre Dame doesn't sign on, Notre Dame is being stubborn, but their options are dwindling. Antoine says not only that, but it takes Notre Dame's independent schedule off the table with, I think, Stanford and USC going to the Big Ten. Well, I think at the beginning I played Pat Forde. Let me play Pat Forde.
Independence is, as it was said to me by somebody familiar with their thinking at this point, still the preference and the leader in the clubhouse. Now, the next sentence was, just got to see what other shoes are going to drop. So, I mean, this thing could still get destabilized to the point that they have to give up independence. If that happens, the Big Ten is the obvious choice.
All right, so that's Pat Forde. And as he said, he was talking with somebody familiar with Notre Dame's thinking. You take that sentence for whatever you want. But that was from the College Football Inquirer. So there's the path. And it makes sense. Notre Dame wants to stay independent. They've always wanted to be independent. They want to cut their own deals. They don't want to share with anybody else. It's worked for them for 100, some odd years. They love it. They love being independent. They'll let all their other, sports go out there with the ACC. But as we see, as things have changed and could drastically change, the ACC or things destabilizing. What would be destabilizing? Well, if the SEC gobbled up a couple, Clemson, Florida State, Miami, North Carolina, like some big time schools, suddenly the ACC, are they going to be guaranteed a spot to the college football playoff? Maybe, but maybe not. And so maybe it won't be that attractive if you're Notre Dame and you're thinking about you have to join up a league. And as Forde said there, it destabilizes. They're not independent. They don't look at the ACC then. Well, then the Big Ten. It could happen. I do think, I said this yesterday, Notre Dame, they recruit nationally, even though they're in Indiana. They love to go down to Miami. They love to go to Texas. They love pulling people in from the East and West Coast, all over the place. That's their thing. They like to do that with their students. They like to do that with their football team, all over the place. So the one thing that we do know is they love playing Notre Dame, their rivalry with USC now in the Big Ten. They also have the traditional rivalry with Stanford. So that could be the nice sweetener there for Notre Dame. You could say, yeah, Notre Dame, we'll bring Stanford in. And then there you go. You've got your couple traditional rivals. It could help. So there's your path. Antoine, I think what you're saying, I hear what you're saying. KC agrees Michigan could end up in the 20s in recruiting. Yeah, it's not, there's a long way to go. It's not a fun thing to think about being in the 20s. Maybe it will affect change. Everybody watching this at any point, you're watching it live here on July the 6th. Watching it on the 7th, you're here in August. Michigan fans are not going to take a recruiting class finishing in the 20s coming off a Big Ten championship lightly. What they're going to do is they're going to say, and you can understand why they would say this, Michigan's approach with the name, image, and likeness is not working. They need to change. Or how many classes can they burn? Like they're taking the wait and see approach. They're zagging. Everybody else is zigging. Maybe it works. Maybe it won't. But if they finish, like I'm predicting, at 26 in the recruiting rankings, people are going to be going bonkers and saying you need to change things up. And maybe that will get somebody, and maybe it will affect change. Let's just say, like, I don't, you don't hope, but if Michigan finishes in the 30s, I think they're just going to sit around and be like, well, let's wait a couple more years. I mean, how many years can you even afford to sacrifice one recruiting class? Maybe. It doesn't sound like a very fun thing to do, but we don't know for sure that they're going to have to sacrifice it. But if they're taking this approach, we'll see if this is going to end up where they're going to have to burn a recruiting class. If they do, then they can get in and, get their saddlebags, put a bunch of cash in there and gold coins and get to work with their, millions of dollars of collective and start spreading the cash around if it doesn't work. So I didn't want to say we'll see, but on this, we're going to have to see how it ends up working. DJ, he says good work. He thinks with this Michigan team having so much depth, they can go in and plug in the best guys for the system. Well, here's the thing. Like there was some, as I mentioned, I put this question on the posting board on the Wolverine Den, and some people are like, look, forget the 5 stars, forget the 4 stars, go out and find, a bunch of Ronnie Bells. Ronnie Bell wasn't even a 3-star. Go find a bunch of guys that aren't highly rated, bring them in, develop them, and let's go. I think that might be what you're saying here. Develop them, go after them, get that eye for talent. Problem is, it's like, yeah, you can develop guys. That's part of it, but you also do have to have talent. Like the thing with Georgia last year, where they had a dozen, 5 stars out there. I mean, supreme talent, half of those guys were the most guys ever picked in the first round. That is, an incredible amount of talent. So you can plug holes and you can develop guys, but ultimately you got to win with some talent. That's what needs to happen. You have to have a nice mix there. Would I like to have all talent or all development? If I had to pick one, I would go at the talent. I mean, it's going to erase more now. For years, Mark D'Antonio at Michigan State. Michigan State couldn't draw flies when it came to recruiting numbers. The classes, they weren't in the top 10. They certainly were, they weren't in the top 25. But, you're sitting here thinking about D'Antonio and some of the guys. I don't know, Darquez Denard, ranked, wasn't even a 3-star, 327. He's got dozens of players. Le'Veon Bell flipped him from Eastern. Ends up being a great back. He did that left and right. But ultimately, to take that next step, he needed to get some 4 and 5 stars and develop those guys. You can't just keep depending on turning water into wine when it comes down to recruiting. AJ saying all this conference and realignment stuff might drive the talent to Michigan. I'm sure recruits don't want to play for nothing, possibly. Well, Antoine, what you're saying is if you end up with just 2 conferences, that would end up helping out Michigan? Yeah, but we're a ways away from that still. I mean, the SE and UCLA, they're not coming in next year. It's going to be, and then, the way this alignment or restructuring is going, we want it to happen right now, but they move at a glacier pace. Last year when they floated out that 12-team playoff, everybody was like, let's go. And they're like, nah, let's not do the 12-team playoff. Well, as mentioned, talk some recruiting. I had Regent Acker's thoughts on the name, image, and likeness. I said that we were going to get to Tracy Smith, Michigan baseball coach, and I'm really happy to bring on from the Maize in Blue Review, the senior editor who has worked so hard over the last couple weeks on baseball and their their search for the next skipper. It's Brandon Justice. He's on the line right now. It's great to have him here.
Just what the folks don't know is how late I am, and I apologize. But yeah, happy to be here to talk about this baseball hire. I'm happy that it's over for the first and foremost part, because at this stage of the game, it had been longer than we expected. But definitely happy to be here and happy to talk baseball as always.
Okay, well, Michigan baseball, Tracy Smith seeking a renaissance together. You wrote this story. You get a picture of him. He's got a gray beard in this photo, but just recently he took a picture and he was picking up his rental car. He said, picked up my randomly assigned rental. Notice the color. He's got a blue car here. He is clean shaven and he is coming in. So he doesn't look like the old gray beard that he does in this picture that you have on your story. Overall, this is we see this with a lot of hires. Sometimes you don't get your first choice. So Chris Fetters, Michigan's a former assistant coach who went to the Detroit Tigers. He's their pitching coach now. He seemed to be number one on the list, right? And then there was the hitting coach from the Padres, might have been number two. I don't know who was number three. Where did Smith ended up in the pecking order when it came down to that? You had the Central Michigan coach that was looked like a viable candidate as well, Brandon.
Yeah, I mean this was a winding process. I mean the coaching search for this baseball team was otherworldly. Like you don't really see too many things like it where there were just so many candidates that had risen to the top and fallen out. But I mean it's certainly how things go for a program that people are skeptical about. It's hard to sell that job right now. You look at why Coach Bakich left due to, facility upgrades and developmental upgrades. And you look at some of the candidates who they were trying to hire, and those are guys that need those tools and understand the importance of those tools. So that was tough. On top of it, you're trying to get guys that are moving north to take over a program that's roster is gutted. So it's a hard job to accept because it's probably at the very least a 2, 3, maybe even 4-year type of rebuild before you start to see the horizon. I think the transfer portal will aid in that and maybe accelerate it a bit, but that's realistically what this job was like for the candidates. So originally when Chris Fetter was the ace and the primary guy, it was pretty much more or less, what will he say? That's going to determine how this search goes. If Chris Fetter wanted this job and Michigan fulfilled it for him or made it good enough for him to take it, this would have been a quick and easy search. Fetter was the guy. It's just he wanted to stay in the pros. He's probably a future manager, and I wish him the best of luck. And then the search really began from there. And the names were topsy and turvy. Jim Penders was the first one to really shine outside of Fetters, and that was pretty much out of Fetter's name. And that was pretty much immediately after Fetter had pulled out of the race. Penders is a 19-year head coach at UConn, and he's really the blueprint of what you need to do to rebuild Michigan. He went to a northern state. He recruited regionally and he developed internally and created a college World Series team almost this year. They made it to a super regional, furthest the program's ever gotten. So what he could have done at Michigan, despite him being 19 years into the game, he's only 53. Right? He started so young at UConn. So he was really an intriguing candidate. And I remember when his name came up after the Fetter decline, I thought, okay, they might actually, A+ this thing, because to me and to all of college baseball, Penders would have been that. So you strike out in him. He decides to stay at UConn. Hard to not believe it. He's been there for 19 years. And then you get to your third guy. And this is who and you brought it up. Here's the mystery of this whole search is who would have been that third guy, quote unquote. Because there were 3 guys, in my opinion, that said no. And in the third one, and this is what I've heard, and it's not confirmed, that the other 2 confirmed, this one not confirmed, but Kevin McMullen, in my from what I've gathered, was going to be that third guy. He's been at Virginia for 20 years, as long as Penders has been the head coach at UConn. McMullen's been an assistant at Virginia. Over the past 5 years, in a poll that's taken by 100 different Division I head coaches, he won Coach of the Year 3 out of the past 5 seasons. Of course, one of those seasons was canceled, 2020, so really it's 3 out of 4. His resume speaks for itself, hitting whisperer, the whole 9. He's got a ton of connections at Notre Dame, a ton. The coach he worked underneath at Virginia was a coach at Notre Dame. His father played football at Notre Dame. There's a lot of connections. When the Notre Dame opening came up, that's when it started to look like McMullen was going to shed away and go more towards going to the Irish and Michigan. So that's when we kind of got to this point where it was Michael Berdar, the hitting coach at the Padres, who's 28 years old, played at Michigan, was a shortstop under Bakich, became a volunteer assistant thereafter, spent some time with the Giants for 2 seasons, and then went to the Padres. He's not the youngest hitting coach in the MLB. He's the second youngest, despite 28 being glaringly young. The other option, Jordan Bischel, Central Michigan head coach. Bischel had a little bit of a repetitive narrative this offseason. He interviewed for what I'm estimating around 4 to 5 jobs. I can confirm 4 of them. He nearly had the Ohio State job. It was thought that he had it. Ohio State's coaching search, very similar to Michigan's, by the way, and that it had a lot of winding turns. And Bischel ends up not getting the Ohio State job for, out of nowhere. Same sort of buzz created at Michigan, ends up not getting the job. And then all roads end to Tracy Smith, who really became, when we heard his name, we were kind of like what? Like, we were like, okay, where did this one come from? Why do we see a connection here? Yada, yada. And it all goes back to his Indiana days. I really think this guy was hired on his Indiana days. Arizona State was not good. He had 2 program records for the worst seasons in Arizona State history while he was at Arizona State. And a lot of people point towards, well, he went to 4 out of 5 tournaments, which is true. Or 4 out of 6 tournaments, I should say, which is true. But in 7 seasons, to have 2 of the program's worst records, to miss the turn, to not make it out of a regional at a place like Arizona State with players like Gage Workman and players like Spencer Torkelson on your team, it's questionable. But you go back to the Indiana days, what he was able to do in the Big Ten. I mean, he hosted a regional. He's the only nationals. He's coached the only Big Ten national seed in the history of the NCAA tournament. He won 40-plus games in back-to-back seasons. He won National Coach of the Year. He won the Big Ten outright, tournament and regular season in 1 season. So it's pretty remarkable what he did there. The question, Dennis, now is, can he repeat that magic here?
Well, looking at his time in Indiana, so he was on, quite a run. Went to his alma mater, and then, as an Indiana assistant and back to his alma mater. But then, his time in Indiana, such a success. That's why you get to go to a place like Arizona State. Is there a chance that he can replicate what he was able to do in the Midwest? He's a Midwest guy, going out to Arizona State. Maybe just wasn't the fit there. More of a Midwest guy, more of a fit for a place like Michigan, obviously in the Big Ten.
Yeah, and that's what Michigan's betting on. I mean, that's all they can bet on. There's really nothing they can come out and say from his Arizona State tenure that's going to make anyone believe that it's going to apply here. Because anything that's brought over from his days at ASU it's going to fail here. It just didn't. Whatever he was trying to do there didn't work. In Indiana, it was like the total opposite. It was incredible. So really, his trajectory, I think, is going to be extremely similar here to what it was at Miami, Ohio, and Indiana, if it's successful, because this is going to go one of 2 ways. This is either going to be one of those things where 4 years down the road, Michigan's extremely mediocre. The roster isn't rebuilt really. Talented guys, but not a lot of wins, et cetera, et cetera. They're bringing in some big time recruits here and there, but they're not developing, and this doesn't play out well, right? And we're 4 or 5 years into it, and they decided to move on. That's one way it could go, and that's the easy answer. Now, the other way it could go is if you look at his time in Miami, Ohio, and you look at his time at Indiana. Now, Miami, Ohio, his alma mater where he played, and then Indiana where he's from, and the Midwest, of course, is his roots. So the other way that this can go is if you look at the trajectory he had at those 2 places. He had to rebuild both of them. I mean, Indiana hadn't been to the College World Series since 1949 until I believe it was an NCAA tournament since then, or maybe a Big Ten championship. Either way, they hadn't experienced championship baseball in Bloomington since 1949 until Tracy Smith in 2013 when they won the Big Ten and went to the NCAA tournament. And then the following year went to the College World Series, won the Big Ten outright. But that took, his first 5 seasons, he had a below 500 record in the Big Ten at Indiana. Of course, at the time, nobody was really looking the other way because Indiana was an afterthought in the sport. He springboarded that program, made it into what it was for the next several years and what it has been for the last several years. It's one of the Big Ten's better programs. Before Tracy Smith, they were relatively an afterthought. And then you talk about Miami, Ohio. Same situation, had to come in and rebuild. Didn't do a whole lot in his first few years, but in those last 2 seasons, won the MAC back-to-back years before going to Indiana. And Indiana didn't do much his first 5 years until the last 2 seasons, then went to Arizona State. So he has a very similar trajectory when he's successful. He rebuilds for the first few years, and then his last 2 seasons, it really turns on. He gets super close, too. I think it was in his third to last season at each stop, he was second place in each conference. So you see the trajectory. And I think that's what Michigan's buying into, is that they understand, like they get it. Like no one's stupid here. The roster is gutted. They're not going to win in 2023. It doesn't matter if they hired, the Belichick of baseball, whoever that may be. Nobody was going to come in here and win in 2023. It's just virtually impossible. They're going to have to rebuild through the transfer portal. They're going to have to hope to get some 2022s and hopefully find some diamonds in the rough as walk-ons and PWOs, whatever it may be. It's not going to happen this year. So Michigan's looking long-term. And Tracy Smith, who is trying to, as I said in the story, build this renaissance for his career and create this story, same sort of deal with Michigan. Tracy Smith had interviews across the country over the past 2 years and didn't get a job. Now, not several, but he had a few and didn't get a job. Michigan, wanted 3 different guys before him and couldn't get either of them. So maybe it's kind of like this perfect marriage for these two to find each other and create this story and rebuild and rebirth this program while they rebirth his career. And it's going to take several years, but if it works out, 4, 5, 6 years from now, we'll be looking back at this conversation like, okay, it's the same trajectory as he had at Indiana, Miami, Ohio.
Well, this just past season was pretty exciting considering what Michigan was able to do in the tournament. Do you think if Michigan did not have the success in the tournament that the Bakich would have gone to Clemson? Did it matter at all? What happened?
No. So we first caught wind that, and when I say catch wind, like I don't mean official report type of stuff. I just mean like very hearsay. It was brought up that Bakich was interested in Clemson 2 months ago, or 2 months before he left, a month and a half before he left. Now, the obvious caveat to that is that he was an assistant coach there and for 1 season as a volunteer under Jack Leggett before going to Vanderbilt with Tim Corbin, who was on that staff at Clemson. But we know how important Clemson is to EB. I mean, we all remember watching the 2019 College World Series and how much, they highlighted Corbin and Bakich's days at Clemson the same way that the Super Bowl highlighted Stafford and Kershaw's days together in Texas. Like it was the same ordeal. Like we just heard about it. So we know how much Clemson's meant to him. So when we first caught wind of it, I just thought like, all right, people are just making the easy connection because it started to look like Monty Lee, who was the head coach before him at Clemson, was going to be on his way out. And but really it was coming from agency circles who spoke about it and thought like, yeah, no, he's definitely got an agent who's made it clear that he's interested in the Clemson job should it come open. And so it wasn't shocking at all to see it happen the way it did. Now, again, I don't know if you remember this, but if you don't remember it at home, Michigan was having a very bad season, like all things considered, in comparison to the rest of Bakich's years, especially given the roster that they had, which was really offensively prolific, but pitching-wise was just depressing. So it was so bad. And then they would go on this run in the Big Ten tournament, and all of a sudden, now remember at that time, we had already reported that Merriman, the pitching coach at the time, had been let go about a month or two prior, and then Bakich was taking over the managerial activities and pitching activity and the game management, and he was taking the mound visits, whereas Merriman used to take those mound visits first, and the head coach would come make the change for the bullpen. He was making all the visits and making all the game planning, et cetera, et cetera. So we knew at that time Michigan was already preparing to reshape their room. I don't think, and I know Bakich had not accepted a job or verbally like made it clear, hey, I'm going to leave for Clemson at any point until we reported it, probably a couple of days prior, give or take. This was not something that was like in the works and done for months, but it was certainly discussed and a potential reality far before Michigan's postseason run.
With the expansion with USC and UCLA, Michigan is in a weird spot when it came to Bakich. I don't know if there's any other sport, maybe softball, that Michigan, you would see would take a backseat to anybody and anything except baseball because of the climate. And I see somebody, taking a shot at baseball here saying it's as exciting as water polo. But is there a chance, like there's always been at least the talk, boy, if you could take Michigan baseball, and I know, they're out, they play down in Florida, they'll go out to Arizona, they go out to California. But if you could, instead of having games in March, if you could have games in June and July, if they could change the calendar, is that a possibility? Now with USC and UCLA coming in, or is that just not going to happen?
It can't, just because of the landscape of summer ball. And so like a lot of these kids need to go play in the Cape. And that's just an example of like one of the collegiate leagues out there. But a lot of these guys go play summer baseball and the collegiate leagues. And that's where they make that's where they really hit gas for the draft. Like, so anybody who's really trying to become a professional prospect, when you're a freshman or a sophomore, if you're not like an absolute stud, and then you're probably not going to the Cape. The Cape is like the spot. Cape Cod baseball, if people don't know what I'm saying, Cape Cod's Collegiate Baseball League is the premier collegiate baseball league in the summertime, and it's where
They use wood bats there.
What was that?
They use wood bats there in the Cape Cod.
I think so. Yeah, they do. Most summer leagues do too, for the most part. But there's so many out there. I mean, there's hundreds. I mean, the USPBL is Michigan's version of it. The Northwoods is a big one in the Midwest, and the Great Lakes League is a decent one too. And there's just so many up and down the country and all over. And so you'll see a lot of freshmen, sophomores kind of hang out locally and play around here. Like, for example, Avery Goldensoft, he's about to be a sophomore right-hander for Michigan. He's playing for the Pitt Spitters in Traverse City. So he's a part of that league, and he's from Michigan, right? So there's plenty of college players on that team too. So that's you can't change the season, because for these kids, like, what's their goal? I mean, they want to go play professional baseball, and college baseball is certainly like going to help them with that, and they're going to use in-game footage from there just as much as they'll use anything. But summer league is where the scouts are like at every single game, surrounding the fences, like. The pro attention is all there, and you're up against all the pros, especially when you're on the Cape. Now in other leagues it's a little bit different, but regardless, that's why you can't change the season. As far as like USC and UCLA, I mean, that changes everything, right? You talk about two California schools. How on earth is Michigan going to recruit California, which they did so well under Bakich, who was a San Jose native? I don't know if they're going to be able to at all, especially given that now they have to compete in conference with two California teams, especially in LA, which is not so much a baseball heavy area, but regardless, like a central area for people in California to want to end up at in college, right? Like, that's not a regular thing for them to want to end up in LA. So it's going to be difficult for Michigan. I mean, this is just tough times for so many reasons, man. I mean, you lose half your roster, your recruiting classes that were so promising. I mean, it's a shame that I decided to start writing again this year or last year, and then have the opportunity and be lucky enough to cover baseball and pump up how good these classes were going to be, because they were, at the time, they were, only for them to inevitably fall apart and never come to fruition and never come play here. It's going to be something to have to watch these kids go on and have the careers they have and wonder what it would have been like had this whole thing stuck together. But a rebuild is a must, and it's a tough time to have one, but you have to look about, honestly, and this is just being real, like 4 to 6 years at the least.
All right. Well, you mentioned recruiting. Do you want to make a prediction on? We had some predictions earlier. I know you, speaking of writing a story and recruiting, Regent Acker, you did a story, I don't know, a month or two ago, a series with the Regent Acker, and he made a prediction yesterday that using name, image, and likeness as a recruiting incentive will be nearly impossible for most schools to keep up. And he said worst return of investment of any NIL scheme by far. And so that was his prediction. Michigan right now is sitting at number 50. If I got a prediction from you, the final Michigan football recruiting rankings by Rivals on February 1st, 2023, what would Brandon Justice, the Maize and Blue Review's senior editor, say?
Well, the first part is, by that time the season will happen, and I fully believe this is going to be a successful season for Michigan. I don't know if they're going to beat Ohio State. At this point, I don't believe they're going to beat Ohio State, but they can still fully go 11-1 and then go win their bowl game and have a dandy time on the recruiting trail in between that. So I think Michigan's success is going to help them. I understand the NIL thing is not going as planned by any means for people who had this whole thing kind of mapped out in their head before it actually took place. But like we said from the jump, Michigan was going to slow play the hell out of this thing. Like, that's what they do with everything. They cross T's and dot I's. It's what they do. And to them, that is a sustainable and provides as much longevity to their NIL system as possible. And while that's vanilla and kind of boring, it's sustainable and long lasting. And so it's not going to be great right now. These are kind of like the wild, wild West days. This is like the housing market in 2008. Like, everyone's doing anything and everything to get things as easy as they want, right? They're just throwing money at everything. All the kids now, this bubble is going to burst the same way it did that. And I think that's exactly what, I'm not to the same like action, right? It's totally different, but it's not like there's actually a bubble. But like what Acker said, it's the worst ROI you could ever have, ever. And like all of these people who are throwing money at the NLI stuff, like, they're rich for a reason. Like they have some sort of financial knowledge. They're well versed, right? And at some point, the literature of finances is going to look at them in the eye and be like, what are you doing? because paying a 4-star from California who's not even just like dedicated to one position, who's going to show up and experiment with 3 until he finally fades out like a million other 4-stars do every year, or 5-stars, 3s. It happens at every ranking, right? It's going to start to look pretty bad when you gave that kid $800K to come play here for 1 year and him to transfer. I mean, we go over the Quinn Ewers thing over and over and over again. I mean, he got over $1 million to go to Ohio State, and then after 1 semester was back at Texas, right? So it's like, we learned our lesson once. How many times are we going to? And right now, it's paying off so much, literally, for these schools because these players are not going to be on campus anytime soon, right? They're going to be here next year. So in between now and then, this is going to be the wild, wild west, and it's not going to end. This is going to keep going and keep going for a year. But when these players get on campus and they're not immediately impacting, and I promise you, not all of them are going to do that. Now, there's going to be some who got, the $1 million, $2 million, and they come play great, and everyone's going to be like, good thing we spent $1 million. But for one of those, there's going to be like 9 of them who like greatly disappoint. Think about how good you thought blank 5-star was going to be at Michigan, who didn't do anything. Imagine if Michigan had thrown $3 million at that guy with a pool of like 10 investors who are, or donors, whatever you want to call it, who are never going to do that again. You know what I'm saying? Like, never going to do that again. So again, if I had to predict the class ranking, it's going to be below 20th. You'd have to think. I don't think it's going to be any better than that. So I'd probably hover around like 24. I think that's fair. And like, that's not the worst thing in the world. They have a loaded roster. They return talent this year, and they're going to return talent next year. They're going to have a bad recruiting class. All right. And this is going to go one of 2 ways, like with everything in life. It's going to go one of 2 ways. Either Michigan's going to build out a sustainable system, and 5 years from now, everyone's like, hey, good thing that they built out that sustainable system because now my school still has the ability to bring players in despite all of the NIL stuff that went on for a year, right? Or it goes the opposite way, and NIL is truly hands-off forever, and Michigan's going to have to catch up somewhere down the road. I truly don't believe it's going to happen. This thing's all going to catch up. It's just how it goes. Like, we all see it happening, even if we don't want to admit it. So that's where I'm at with it. I just don't think it's the worst thing in the world to be a 20 to 25th recruiting class, because last time Michigan had one of those, it included Hutch, and it included Haskins, it included Rodney Bell, and the list goes on.
Well, I'm pretty close with you because I picked 26, so we're not so far apart. I do think the flip side of there have been a lot of schools that had boosters that have been throwing money at recruits and not getting that return of investment at all because nobody could know about it, and they were sliding under the table. And, they continue to do it. And I think that there's going to be at least a dozen teams that are going to be just fine with finding some booster who is ready to take, his hard-earned money, but he is ready to burn it on football. And
that's another thing about recruiting, Dennis, and I love that you brought that up, because a lot of those schools who do that, you look at their rosters, they recruit, and maybe they don't do it literally, but they're basically recruiting off recruiting rankings. I don't know how many times I have to say it. Michigan does not recruit on recruiting rankings. Like, you can enjoy that, or you can like not like that at all. Well, it's just not what they do. They evaluate internally. They think Tom Gamble does a fantastic job of it, along with a few of the others in the room, right? And they bet on that, and they have done that since Harbaugh's been here. Besides 2016 and 2017, and how did those classes turn out? So when they recruited on identity and fit, it was 2018. How did that class turn out? Just my thought. Michigan recruits on identity and fit. How is this going to work out 3 years from now? Not how much is he going to do right away. Now, granted, Keon Sabb, Will Johnson, Derek Moore, Mason Graham. Those are guys who are going to impact right away, more than likely. Darius Clemens, more than likely, they're going to come in and find time right away. Those guys weren't, quote-unquote, identity and fit recruits. They were really good, but as soon as Michigan got to know them, they also happened to fit that identity and mold. And when it attracted them to think, oh, this kid's gonna be good at Michigan, well, sure as hell that kid was like, hey, I'm also gonna blend in here and I'm gonna enjoy it. So that's typically how it goes. So Michigan's not throwing $5 million at a 5-star. It's like they want to know if this guy's gonna work in our system, because they have a very specific identity that's worked for them for the first time. And how long had they beat Ohio State last year? I mean, it's working. They're not going to mess with what's working at this point.
Great. Well, good stuff. And I got one more question for you, and it surrounds Dante Moore. You were
lovely.
Very early going. You were out there on the sideline taking videos, but you said, like, this guy is he might be whatever he was at the time, 16 or 17, but he acts like a pro. Like, he knows all the ins and outs. And I was just reading a story from him yesterday. I think it was from Yahoo. Some of his quotes out at the Elite 11, where he's like, he's not talking to anybody over the phone anymore. He's only he didn't say he was like the mob, but he's only doing in person sit downs, right? And he wasn't tipping his hand. It wasn't giving any indication it was going to go into the fall or who was his leader or when he was going to make a decision. So, and then you have Oregon though, who appears to be the leader, and now they're a little bit in limbo. So the longer this plays out, I'm asking you about, Michigan, who might have something cooking with a big collective that they're ready to spring in the fall. Does every day or week that goes by make you feel like Michigan has just a little bit, even if they don't have, if they only have this much of a chance right now, that they might have a little bit more chance as the weeks go on here?
Yeah, I mean, the longer it goes on, is the better for Michigan. It just gives them an opportunity to do one of two things. I mean, either come up with a pitch that's strong enough to get him here, and that's not the game they want to play, so that's why I say it's if they want to do it. And then the other side is just, if he wants to come here, he's going to come here. Like, we've done all we can. And I feel like that's kind of where they're at, is like, they've rolled out all the stops for that kid. Like, I don't know what else they can do. And I get it. Like, he's good enough to do that. But at this point, if you're Michigan, like, shoot, you've done everything you can do at this point to get that kid to come here. And other schools are doing more monetarily, maybe not from a recruiting perspective, not offering the same opportunities, but they're doing more monetarily, and that's what's getting them to where they're at NIL wise. And I don't know how else to say that politically correct, but it's kind of where things are at. It's just, this is the days of NIL. It is what it is. Let's see here. I think Michigan will continue. No, I don't think so. I don't think Michigan's going to continue.
You're reading the question for the people that are on the podcast. By the way, Baker Mayfield has just been traded to the Panthers.
Oh,
that breaking news coming down. KC asking you if you think Michigan will continue with their two quarterbacks until Cade McNamara graduates. Would this make Dante Moore want to go to another school?
No, I don't think Michigan would ever want to go with a two quarterback system if it hadn't a choice. But I feel like they're in a spot right now where they have two extremely good quarterbacks, and they're like, let's just use both of them, because they're both vastly different in their style and what they're successful in, like play design wise and everything. So I think at this point, they just have a unique situation where they just ran into a spot where they have two really good guys who want to compete and have that competition hunger in them and bring out the best in each other. And they want to roll out this two quarterback system, and it worked for them last year. They're probably going to ramp it up some more this year, and they seem that it works. Now, again, I don't think any football coach in America, if you're like, hey, do you want to have a two quarterback system or one quarterback system? He's going to say, I want to have one quarterback system if it's just a press of a button. Michigan just has this, unique kind of duo between those two that are so contrasting that it's hard for defenses to prepare for both. And when they switch on and off like they do, it's really hard to, adjust in game for defenses. And it works out well for Michigan because a lot of people think JJ's play style makes him a bit erratic and dangerous, but he's also like pretty smart. And then we all know how smart Cade is. He might be the most, how do I say this? He might be the safest bet under center Michigan's had in a long time. Like, you always feel like mistakes aren't going to happen. They might not run the ball as long as you want, or he might not throw it beyond 10 yards more than once or twice a game, but regardless, it's very safe when he's in there. So they just have a unique situation. That's all. No, I don't think they're going to keep rolling with the two quarterback system.
Yeah, I think that Harbaugh and Weiss and company wouldn't mind for both of these guys to stay around for 2 more additional years. But the likelihood of after this year of having both of them stay at Michigan, there's more of a chance, not kicking anybody out of the door or anything, but there's more of a chance that one of those guys will leave after this year than that they will have some 2 quarterback deployment next year. I think.
Yeah, fully agree.
Yeah. All right. I want to remind people, Josh Henschke had put this tweet out just yesterday or the day before. You hear what Brandon is saying all about that Michigan baseball coaching search. You can get access to Aunt May's and Blue Review content for free until the season opener. Use the code UofMFree22 at checkout. That's going to michigan.rivals.com. So we'll see you on the Den. There's no reason not to. So check that out. Everything that we're doing right now and throwing the questions back and forth and answering them, that is done all day, all night, 7 days a week over there on the Den. So that's a great, that is a great thing for everybody out there. And so we hope to see you over there. Justice, it was great seeing you, and all the best, and we'll talk with you soon.
Absolutely, sir. Appreciate you having me on.
There he is, Brandon Justice. I'll have to fix where it says